Since the burning down of a police station in Minneapolis and the move by the city government for a new form of community policing, a new movement has sprung up of alternative styles of policing under the interesting slogan of defund the police. I've seen on the couple forums and outlets the multiple interpretations of the idea, and curious, I wanted to look into the different ideas presented. The statement defund the police is a provocative statement by nature, meant to evoke an emotional response. I'm sure only a few radicals and ideologues on the fringes would support the idea of actually disbanding the police. To actually defund the police is a radical idea, but only if you take the statement literally. And there seems to be three camps within this movement. The ones that take the statement literally, as in actually getting rid of the institution that is policing, while there are others who push for reform in policing, and the last group that would like to see resources diverge from the police to other institutions. So let's explore them. So for the people who take the statement literally, either because they believe that policing itself is illegitimate, may be the type of people with more anarchist leaning, and see the police as a reflection of a corrupt system, whether it be a capitalist, American, imperialist, or a racist system that must be brought down. Or perhaps the police themselves are seen as the instigators of violence, the type of people who bring trouble by their very existence. If this logic holds, if there were less bad cops, then perhaps there would be less criminal activity, as there would be less cops to target people and charge or instigate people with crimes. Less cops would mean less crime. This, of course, is a cynical outlook of policing, a contrarian position, but it's not without its audience of people who distrust large organizations, especially ones that use force. Couple that with real and perceived police corruption, brutality, arbitrariness, and injustice, and destroying the current system and replacing it with a new system, or maybe no system, may seem like the best course of action. And we can see this idea play out a bit in Seattle. The Autonomous Zone, also known as the Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, is a precinct within the center of Seattle that was abandoned by police. As the Seattle police chief explains it,
"You should know, leaving the precinct was not my decision. You fought for days to protect it. I asked you to stand on that line, day in and day out, to be pelted with projectiles, to be screamed at, threatened, and in some cases hurt. Then to have a change of course nearly 2 weeks in, it seems like an insult to you and our community. Ultimately, the city had other plans for the building and relented to severe public pressure. We have heard that there are armed people patrolling the streets near 12th and Pine. Of course, this is very concerning, especially because we don't know who these people are. We've also received report that these armed people may be demanding payment from business owners in exchange for some of that protection. We've also heard that they may be demanding to see identification from people who live in the area. This is not legal, and we've asked anyone who may be experiencing this to come forward and file a police report so that we can investigate these crimes."
the abandoning of the precinct allowed for a power vacuum to happen. Armed men have allegedly extorted businesses within the Chaz zone. All of this seems to me stereotypical of the West Coast. With large protest movements, anti-authority mindset, cooperatives, and craft beer, this seems to me par for the course. And perhaps the reason why the Chaz zone has not devolved more into a dangerous problem is that 1. Washington state is an open carry state, meaning that it is legal to carry a weapon out in the open in Seattle, creating quite a deterrent for crimes of opportunity. And 2, the police just left a certain zone, but haven't actually disbanded. And given the order, the police can come in and re-establish order within a moment's notice. But we could look at other cases of serious police abandonment. How about Montreal's 1969 Night of Terror up in Canada, where Montreal police, angry about low pay compared to Toronto police, went on strike for 18 hours. The city in less than a day's time erupted into chaos. Stores were looted, banks robbed, grudges fulfilled, and so on. By the next day, 2 people were killed and over 200 seriously injured. Or we could look at the case where the police were unable to maintain order, perhaps the most famous riot in the US being the LA riots of 1992. Sparked by the beating of Rodney King by police officers, and acquittal of the officers, led to one of the largest and most destructive riots in U.S. history. With anger over the justice system, ethnic violence between blacks and Koreans, and arson, showing just how quickly society can break down without order. In the end, over 60 people died and 2,000 people were injured as a result of the riots, with an estimated $1 billion in damage for the city. We can quickly see the general idea of what happens when order is not maintained. So the idea of disbanding the police would seem silly, and I doubt if there are but a few credible people who would want to disband the police in their community. So what are the other options? Instead of defunding, what about reform? I'll go ahead and cover one of the largest police reform organizations, Join Campaign Zero, as their site has a lot of good suggestions for reform. And the 10 goals stated on their site are: 1. Ending broken window policy. 2. Community oversight. 3. Limit use of force. 4. Independent investigations and prosecutions. 5. Community representation. 6. Body cams. 7. More training. 8. End for-profit policing. 9. Demilitarization. 10. Fair police union contracts. So let's look at some of their suggestions. So their first suggestion, ending the broken window policy, seems to me to be a more academic problem than policy problem. The idea of broken window policy is the theory that says allowing people to break the law, no matter how minor, will encourage a sense of safety for criminals and more rampant criminal activity in a city.
Okay, then, I'll throw a rock at the old Granville house.
Oh, no, don't. I love that old house.
No, you see, you make a wish and then try and break some glass in. You got to be a pretty good shot nowadays, too.
Oh,
Now,
no,
what?
George, don't. It's full of romance, that old place. I'd like to live in it.
In that place?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't live in as a ghost. Now, watch. It's right in the second floor there, see?
That a broken window is a signal to others that it's okay to break windows. This was then applied to law and was most famously implemented in New York City during the 90s, when New York City was experiencing a crime wave. Within a decade, violent per capita crime was halved. Now, I'm not saying correlation equals causation, as the reason why crime fell in New York and throughout the nation during the 90s is controversial in criminology. But the problem presented here seems to be about a difference in policing philosophies. Broken window theory is associated with stop and frisk and zero tolerance, but is either rightfully or wrongfully, depending who you read, associated with a significant drop in crime in New York City. So it would seem that being for or against ending broken window policy would depend on your philosophy of policing.
The bridge is a mile long. Well, you going to throw a rock? Hey, that's pretty good.
Well then, what about community oversight? Well, this point seems to cover two other points. Independent investigations and community representation all fall under the same umbrella of police accountability. And this is the heart of the issue for many American riots, whether it be Floyd protests or LA riots. It's the feeling that police aren't being held accountable for their actions. Now for the Floyd riots, some anger exists because of how long prosecution took to level charges against the officers. And don't forget, another killing happened a month earlier that created more tension in the U.S., with the killing of Ahmaud Arbery while running that may have been racially motivated. The killers of Arbery were able to walk free for nearly 2 weeks before they were arrested. To many, this was an injustice that was endemic within the system, and when Michael Floyd died while multiple officers watched, the anger boiled over. But accountability seems to be the heart of the issue for policing within the U.S. The ideas that have been pushed forward are a police force that is more accountable to the community, such as civilian review boards for police officers and third-party prosecution. On the civilian board idea, I'm skeptical. In my mind, it seems more patronizing to police than helpful. As is common throughout the U.S., police chiefs are usually voted on or appointed by the city government, and sheriffs are usually voted in. So there is some accountability for the leadership of these institutions as they are chosen by the community. I just wonder if a civilian board would be more hindrance than help, because I can imagine anti-police activists joining these boards just to harass the police. The reform I'm most interested in is the third-party prosecution. Instead of local police being prosecuted by the local prosecutor, this jurisdiction would fall to an independent prosecutor funded by the state or federally. A neutral third party would hopefully level charges faster, and the neutral party would have a less biased view. The problem this is trying to solve is prosecution bias for police, as many prosecutors have to work with local police to fight crime and develop relationships with these officers. So independent prosecution would create less bias in the system. Other points on this subject is more police transparency. A push for required body cams for police while on duty. I'm surprised not more states have this in law, though it may be enforced locally. This policy would benefit both officers and citizens, as recordings are a reliable source of evidence in cases. So I'm pretty sure most people would be on board for this. Training seems like the most obvious goal, as more police training would create more competent police and a police force that is better able to de-escalate situations. And ideally a better funded police force with higher pay would attract better applicants. The goal does run in contradiction to the defund the police movement, which shows the difficulty of provocative slogans. But I'm sure many people will agree that a better funded and trained police force is ideal. And here are the goals that I start to disagree with. To limit the use of force goal. The website points out that police in other countries, such as the UK or Germany, have better police records and less police killing. As is often pointed out, police officers kill roughly 1,000 people a year. And we can see the stats better on prisonpolicy.org. In comparing the US to other countries, for every 10 million people in the US, 33.5 are killed by police. The next country is Canada, with 9.8 deaths per 10 million. Now this is a big difference between countries, but I'm going to defend the police here and argue that they've been dealt a difficult hand, as there are a couple factors that come into play. Policing in the US may be more difficult because the circumstances are different. Guns are much more readily available to the populace than in other nations. If you think this through, that means that every encounter the police have, whether it be a traffic stop, domestic disturbance, or any other situation, could quickly become dangerous for the officers because of the large volumes of weapons in the U.S. The United States may simply be a more dangerous place to police in. And we can see the effect happen for the U.S. police too. As of 2018, 158 police officers were killed in a year. So it's not so clear to me, if you take police officers from, say, Britain or Germany, that they would act differently from American Leos, as their environment is completely different. Another factor when comparing different countries is looking at demographics. The US on average has a younger population than most other industrialized nations. If you study criminology, you know that there's a very strong link between age and crime in men, called the age crime curve. As men predominantly commit crime, and most men who do commit crime, especially violent crime, tend to do so in their early 20s. If we look at the average age for men in these countries, we can see that in the US, the average age for a man is 36, in Germany, it's 46, and in the UK, it's 39. But we can break down these numbers even more, as different ethnicities in the US have different ages. The median age for a white man in the US is 42. The median age for a black man in the US is 32, and the median age for an Asian man is 35. Notice that there's nearly a 10-year difference between the average age of a white man and a black man. The suggestion is that the younger your group is, the more likely your group will suffer from the age crime curve, as younger men are more likely to commit violent crimes. The US has a younger population than other industrialized nations, and certain demographics in the US have an even younger population. Age, I think, doesn't account for the large disparity between police killings in the US compared to other nations. I do believe it comes down to culture playing a large role in police killings, as firearms are far more available in the US than in other nations. If we look at the Washington Post data, who've been collecting data on police shootings since 2014 with the shooting of Michael Brown, it shows that roughly 54% of deadly police shootings involved a suspect armed with a gun, while only 4% were unarmed. Another 25% of police shootings dealt with mentally ill people. So I think it's unfair to put all the blame on police with sayings such as limit the use of force, as it would suggest that officers already don't limit the use of force. And this gets to the next issue that is commonly brought up with policing: the militarization of police. As Joint Campaign Zero points out, there's a federal program called the 1033 program that sells military equipment to police departments at large discounts. The argument goes that police shouldn't be a military-like force, they should just be police. But I disagree with this sentiment. American police officers are also U.S. citizens and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They also have the right of self-defense to protect their life and others if they fear it's in danger. And one of the ways you do that is by bringing overwhelming force to dangerous situations. Would you rather be in a police car or an armored car during an active shooting situation? If a department has access to armored vehicles, they should use them, as they have a direct responsibility to protect their officers. And if the department can get large discounts from the federal government, all the better. I think people sometimes forget the danger in police work to have such a sentiment. I'd rather have a well-armed and competent police force that is able to protect the public than a weak police force that is unable to do its duty. We could just look at the North Hollywood shootout to see this in action. 2 active shooters with modified automatic rifles and homemade body armor were able to terrorize North Los Angeles for 44 minutes, robbing a bank, injuring 20 people, and firing roughly 2,000 rounds. The police were militarized after this incident because officers didn't have a strong enough caliber nor the range to stop these shooters. The last part of these goals for police reform is policy against for-profit policing, which is just ending quota systems for tickets and anti-civil forfeiture laws. These seem reasonable. So those were the goals offered by one of the largest organizations for police reform. But the idea of defunding the police also takes another form, of resource allocation. The argument goes that the roles and obligations the police are expected to fulfill are too much to ask of them. Police are expected to deal with people with mental health problems, homeless people, drug addicts, and other societal problems that stretch the limits of what police can do. So the suggestion goes that instead of investing this money into the police, diverge this money into other institutions like mental health facilities or homeless shelters so that police can focus on criminal activity. And this seems like a reasonable compromise, as these organizations can take a role of intervention and prevention to solve societal problems, while reducing the load for officers. Defunding the police in this context would mean less money for police, but hopefully more diverse institutions to deal with differing problems in society. In all, the defund the police movement suffers from its own vocabulary. The statement is meant to be provocative and create discussion, but many people have differing ideas of its interpretation. I would have preferred the slogan, "Reform the police," but it seems that ship has sailed. Either way, I've seen a lot of differing arguments for police reform, and they've all been interesting. I'll be watching with great interest on how things play out.
Policing is probably the most visible cog of what's wrong, but it extends well beyond policing, and we've got a lot of work to do as a society.
And when you say we've got a lot of work to do, what can we start to do in order to rebuild these relationships?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, we need to have an approach across the country on how do we respond in terms of a use of force. And let's talk about what we do, how we do it, how we make it better. This is our moment to come together and actually look to see how we can make policing the best it can be for the good cops and for the community that deserve those good cops.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. Subscribe if you want more. Thanks, y'all.